So long as there are Eldians, this hell will never end. This bloodshed will never stop. What we've repeated so many times will only continue for eternity. This was spoken by Zeke Yaeger after his announcement of the euthanization of the Eldians. Zeke understands the hatred from the Eldians. He knows what he must do to stop the pain and suffering upon the world. He's not an evil character though. He's always had good intentions. In fact, he's always sought to save the greater good of humanity, but by following a flawed utilitarian ideology at the cost of the lives of others. He uses his reasoning of saving the greater good of humanity to morally justify the reasonings behind his euthanization plan. Zeke believes that the world follows a cycle of hatred and a cycle of pain, one that can only be stopped by eliminating the source of the pain. It's not his fault for developing this idea though. Zeke is a character with a tragic life story. Throughout his entire life, from his birth to his current life, he's been under the life of oppression and discrimination by the Marleyans, forced to live as an inferior being. All he ever wanted as a child was to be loved by his parents, but instead he was overshadowed by the guilt and anger of his father and his dream to rebuild the nation of Eldia. With this burden upon his life, Zeke is pushed further and molded further and further into becoming the child that Grisha Yaeger could never become. His father forced him to conform into this mold that he could never fit into. This soon forces Zeke to support pro-Marleyan ideals, especially after he meets a father figure named Tom, who essentially teaches Zeke the ways of antinatalism and tells him of the euthanization plan. He makes Zeke believe that Eldians and Marleyans and the rest of the world could never coexist without suffering. If Zeke could rid the world of the Eldians, then there would be no more Titans that could harm the world. Zeke's argument goes like this: Eldians experience so much pain and suffering that if they were never born into existence, they would never have to experience this pain and suffering. Zeke has the belief that the world would experience a net positive if all of the potential Titans of the world were eradicated from the surface of the planet. This is essentially the antinatalist philosophy that he follows, which is the idea that procreation is morally reprehensible, since if you're never born, you can never experience pain or suffering. Thus, the absence of pain is good. He follows the idea that any form of pleasure is good, and the absence of pain is also good. The absence of pleasure is not bad. Thus, a person lacking existence and being absent from both pain and pleasure nets a positive. Zeke's ideas are not too far-fetched from what humans have done in the past, especially during World War II, where many nations explored the science of eugenics, popularized by Charles Darwin's natural selection theory, and the ideas for inheritable traits, for people to breed out more desirable traits, making those with less desirable traits sterile and unable to breed so that the offspring would not supposedly suffer from whatever genetic inferiority they had. The problem with this and these types of eugenics is that they're always subjective. The traits we find desirable, the things we think will allow people to find happiness, are subjective and always prone to change. The issue with Zeke is that he sort of has a depressive and pessimistic type of view that all Eldians are prone to the same suffering that he endured. However, throughout Zeke's planning, he disregarded the possibility of people actually enjoying their lives. While his life may not have been as good as he hoped it to be, there may have been many other Eldians, especially the ones on Paradise, who lived prosperous and enjoyable lives without massive oppression. Additionally, Zeke's pursuit of having an idealized world with happiness is nothing but a figment of his imagination. There can never be a world where there is just pure happiness like the one that he is trying to create through his plans. Another issue with the euthanization plan is that it makes the assumption that the eradication of the Eldians would result in world peace. In reality, the Marleyans would continue to go on to war with the other nations. In the future, who's to say that Hizuru won't go into war with Marley again in Marley's vast conquest to take over the world? Another problem with the argument is that it's saying that suffering is always worse than pleasure. For example, if the world were to break the Eldians free of their oppression, and the world were to become more progressive in regards to their social ideals, the sterilization of the Eldians would cause the Eldians to suffer the consequences of being unable to pass their offspring and have children. This would then be immoral. But what does make sense from Zeke's perspective is that despite causing immense suffering and pain upon the current generations of Eldians by forcing them to not give birth, he could prevent essentially an infinite amount of suffering from all the future Eldians. Even if there's a chance that the Eldians are freed from their oppression, the mere fact that they can just transform into a Titan makes them a volatile tool for warfare, and thus there would always be that lingering fear amongst the other human races about their own safety and the Eldians race's ability to transform. Now, Attack on Titan is filled with a lot of these moral dilemmas, and it's clear how much effort Isayama has put into the writing behind the show. Moral philosophy is a complex concept that is difficult to argue about, and formulating our own opinions about these matters requires a lot of moral philosophical reasoning to reach a justified conclusion. So which side are you on? Do you believe that the Eldians should be euthanized and eradicated from the world, or do you think the world should witness their own pain and suffering and face the consequences of the rumbling?